So our final speaker today is someone I'm really excited about, Cari Ebert. She's a pediatric SLP in private practice in Kansas City, Missouri, and she specializes in the birth to 3 population and has a passion for apraxia and autism. Hers might be a familiar name to you because in normal unquarantined life, she gives professional trainings around the country. I have a binder full of her notes on apraxia in my own office. It is a real honor to have Cari join us for this event and a privilege to hear her speak today live about the nuts and bolts of apraxia. All right, Cari, you're up.
Excellent. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it very much. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. All right. Let's see here. All right, are we good? Is it up there?
Yeah, you're good to go.
Okay, very good. Okay, so yeah, I'm excited to talk about apraxia. For those of you who don't know who I am, I'll just give you my quick spiel. I specialize in early intervention, and I'm really a suspected childhood apraxia of speech specialist. I'm working with the little itty bitty ones, and so I'm really focusing on those kiddos who probably don't have a firm diagnosis yet. I'm a defender of play. One of the courses I present around the country is called The Power of Play. True play is disappearing, and we are seeing the effects of it on child development. I'm an autism mom. I'm a consultant. I'm an author. I am usually a professional speaker. Everything has been, of course, canceled, so I am very excited to be on a platform and be presenting again. Normally, I'm a frequent flyer. I present almost every week somewhere around the country, so it's very odd for me to not be in the air. And I am a 7-year breast cancer survivor. So there is my social media information. If you don't follow me, I invite you to do so. Normally, I am posting on information related to child development. The past, I don't know, 8 to 10 days, however long we've been in this pandemic, I've been trying to post more information on coaching and supporting families. Just real quickly, if you don't have it yet, I have my Coaching the Caregiver in Early Intervention handout series that is available on my website that has 54 handouts in it that you can use when you're coaching families. So my family, my husband Jim and I have been married 26 years. We have 3 children, and I have a new son-in-law. And our son Aaron, the tall guy in the back there, he has autism, he has apraxia, and he has sensory processing disorder. So he has taught me so much about my profession and teaches me, continues to inspire me in everything that I do. I probably don't need to do these disclosures, but just so you know, I'm going to talk about some of the products that I have created and that I benefit financially from. I have my Apraxia book that Dave Hammer and I co-authored, and Dave just retired at the end of 2019, so I was very honored to write that book with him. And then I have all of my Silly Sounds cards, which I designed for pre-verbal children who are struggling to find their voice. And then they come in Spanish as well. And then I have my animal vowels, which really focuses on vowel sounds. So I will mention these a little bit as we get into this. So we're going to talk a little bit about childhood apraxia of speech, and rather than give you ASHA's definition from the 2007 technical report, which I'm sure you've all seen a million times, I'll just give you Apraxia Kids. They're a wonderful nonprofit organization, and they say CAS is a motor speech disorder that makes it difficult for children to speak. Children with the diagnosis of apraxia of speech generally have a good understanding of language and know what they want to say. So the key here is that there's going to be a pretty significant gap between receptive and expressive language, and that's going to show up on standardized tests. However, they have difficulty learning or carrying out the complex sequenced movements that are necessary for intelligible speech. So the key here, the key word there is movements. Praxis is a Greek word that means skilled movement. So this is a movement disorder. This is not a language-based disorder. This is a movement disorder. The way I explain it to parents, to teachers, to non-SLPs, I'll say something like, you know, it seems to me that your little guy is having some difficulty with motor planning. And what I mean by that is he seems to know exactly what he wants to say, but he's having difficulty getting the message from here to here. right? So what we're looking at is a wiring problem. It's as though the brain says speak, but the mouth doesn't respond. And so that's what we're going to do in our sessions together, is we are going to identify strategies that will help your child's mouth learn to respond when the brain says speak. So real quickly, I just want to clarify some terminology. On social media, I see a lot of parents and some professionals talking about nonverbal 2-year-olds. And I also see the term, I'll see them describe the child as being mostly nonverbal. And those two terms concern me just a little bit. So pre-verbal is a term we use to describe young children who don't talk yet. We don't describe babies as being nonverbal. So we wouldn't describe a 2 or a 3-year-old who doesn't talk yet as nonverbal. Those kids are pre-verbal. Minimally verbal is a really important term. This is a term used to describe children who have limited verbal output when compared to same age peers. So you could have a minimally verbal 2.5-year-old, you could have a minimally verbal 9-year-old, right? So we're just talking about this child. Pre-verbal indicates no words at all, whereas minimally verbal indicates that the child says at least a few words or a word approximations. And then the term nonverbal is a term we're going to use to describe older children who are not verbal despite years and years of speech therapy. It's not likely that these children will become functional verbal communicators. And instead of calling them nonverbal, I think a better way to describe them is just saying these children have complex communication needs. AAC is going to be appropriate for all 3 of those kiddos who are struggling with verbal communication. So a list of resources, there's so many out there, so I just tried to give you some. Obviously, the technical report. If you have not read the Principles of Motor Learning and the Treatment of Motor Speech Disorders, it's a tutorial from Dr. Moss and colleagues. It is absolutely essential. You have to understand the principles of motor learning before you can provide treatment for children who have apraxia. The book that Dave and I wrote, Margaret Fish has a wonderful book. Dr. Edith Strand, anything by her is going to be wonderful. The Apraxia Kids organization, they normally have a conference every July. It's a 3-day conference. I am presenting 3 different courses at it. If it happens this year, it is in July in Dallas. So we'll keep our fingers crossed that maybe our country will be back up and running by then. I just saw during the last presentation that the president has recommended stay in place until April 30th. So, I don't know. We'll see how this goes. And then anything by Jenny Bjorn, anything by Amy Graham on Instagram. You guys, you want to follow them. They are just wonderful resources. So what I thought I'd do is start with differentiating CAS from other speech sound disorders. On my website, there's a huge list, a huge library of all the courses, self-study courses that I have available. So I have a 4-part series on assessing differential diagnosis and treatment of childhood apraxia of speech. So I'm just giving you a little snippet of that today, but I have many courses on this topic available on my website. So let's start with childhood apraxia of speech versus an articulation disorder. So we know that articulation errors are very common in children who are just learning to talk. And I don't know, from grad school, we learned that articulation orders, an abbreviation or an acronym is SOTA, right? They're usually either substitutions, omissions, distortions, or additions. And we know that the majority of children are going to outgrow those articulation errors on their own. But when they don't, and the child has reached a certain age, then we know speech therapy certainly may be indicated. And the main thing to really acknowledge about articulation therapy is that we are helping the child learn how to correctly produce or articulate consonant sounds. Okay, when we talk about motor planning therapy, we are going to be talking about the production of vowels as well. And we don't really talk about vowels much in articulation therapy. So it's going to be really important to understand and be able to explain to parents and teachers and non-SLPs that in articulation disorder, we are fixing consonants. So let's compare and contrast. If we are looking at childhood apraxia of speech, or if you work in early intervention, we are usually looking at suspected childhood apraxia of speech. We are talking about difficulty moving. Remember, praxis means movement. So difficulty moving between sounds, syllables, and words. So the technical term for that movement is co-articulation. That's going to be so important. Co-articulation is the interweaving movements between sound, syllables, and words. So the fancy term is co-articulation. When we are looking at an articulation disorder, the child is unable to correctly articulate or produce certain consonant sounds. So we're not talking about movement problems. We're talking about a difficulty actually producing that consonant sound. With CAS, vowel errors are common. In an articulation disorder, we don't really even talk about vowels. CAS, inconsistent productions on repeated trials. So the best advice I'm going to give you in these 45 minutes is this. If you're giving an articulation test, the way you can turn it into a CAS screener is to have the child say the target word 3 times consecutively. Because if the child, let's say your target word in an articulation test is fish, okay? The child with apraxia might call it a bish, and then say shift, and then say sif. Whereas a child with an articulation disorder is going to say bish, bish, bish. They're going to have consistent errors. Children with apraxia have inconsistent errors on repeated trials of the same utterance. With CAS, you may see effort associated with talking tasks. That is not one of the key diagnostic markers, though. I say the child may. Most of the littles that I work with in early intervention, there is some type of effort that is pretty visible to me. I see groping. I see kids look away when they're pressured to speak. And you might say, let's say you're holding a ball next to your mouth, and you say, ball, and the child might do this. And they look away. So sometimes we miss that groping because the child is averting eye gaze because they recognize that this is tough. And kiddos with an articulation disorder, they don't have effortful speech. That's not something we recognize or notice. Kids with CAS have impaired prosody. Prosody is the melody of speech. What we know is when kids with apraxia finally do become verbal, their speech doesn't sound like other kids when they talk. What we often hear is choppy, robotic sounding speech, and it's due to difficulties with co-articulation. I want a tootsie peas. You couldn't sound more robotic if you tried. So it's going to be very important in our therapy that we're working on that movement between sounds and syllables. And when do we start working on prosody? Today. Whatever age the child is today, that's when we start working on prosody. That's why I am such a huge proponent of things like sound effects, right? So all my silly sounds cards, ooh, or, whatever you've got here, wah, wah. So we really want to, draw attention to our mouth, but also we want to focus on prosody. With articulation, kiddos, prosody is intact. With CAS, the child may be able to say a speech sound in one context, but not in another. This is what makes SLPs crazy. So the child might be able to say ma, right, for mom, but they can't say me or moo or my or more. And you're like, I don't get it. He has the sound in ma. Why can't he use it in other contexts? Well, because what I've learned over the years, I've been an SLP for 25 years, and what I've learned is that kiddos with motor planning struggles, they don't seem to be acquiring their speech sounds in the same way that neurotypical kiddos do. And so they seem to be using a gestalt way of learning words. And so they simply learn a whole word, ma or mom, but they never actually babbled. Ma, 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 ba, ba. We have research by Oberby and Kaspari that shows that kiddos with apraxia have limited canonical babbling early on. So they're not learning to use those sounds. Simply learn a word in a context, and then they can't pull those phonemes apart and use them in other contexts. Kiddos with articulation disorders, they can't say the speech sound correctly in any context. Okay, so those are the differences that we're really looking at there. So just remember, it's co-articulation versus articulation. Those are different problems, and they require different types of goals. How do we differentiate CAS from a phonological disorder? Well, a phonological disorder involves patterns of sound errors. And so this is a linguistically based speech sound disorder. So the child, every language has a phonological system, if you will, has phonology. So Spanish has a phonology, English has a phonology, Mandarin has a phonology, and phonology is really the rules of the spoken language. Okay, so kiddos who have phonological disorders, they are using sound patterns. the errors, error patterns. And so they're doing things like final consonant deletion and cluster reduction and gliding and fronting and all of those things. Now, what's fascinating about kiddos with a phonological disorder is if you're a familiar listener, you understand the child pretty well because they use consistent error patterns. You may not understand him during the evaluation, but the mom will say, I understand almost everything that he says, but nobody else seems to. Yeah, the longer you hear that child with consistent errors talk, the easier it is to understand or decode their speech. So let's look at the contrast here. CAS is a motorically based speech sound disorder. Phonological disorder is a linguistically based speech sound disorder. So can a child have both? Of course they can. You can have a child with CAS and a child with a phonological disorder, right? One is motorically based, one is linguistically based. CAS, limited number of vowels and diphthongs. Usually there's overuse of the neutral vowels. Ah. If you don't know you have a tongue and the tongue rests in the floor of your mouth, those are the three vowel sounds you can make. Ah. Whereas with a phonological disorder, vowels are typically intact. With CAS, we have inconsistent speech errors on both vowels and consonants. With a phonological disorder, they have consistent patterns of errors that can be grouped into categories. Kiddos with a phonological disorder don't just leave off final T sounds. How many final sounds do they leave off? All of them, right? It is a huge class of errors, okay? It's not just one sound, it's a class of sound errors. Again, CAS may have effortful speech. Kiddos with a phonological disorder, in early intervention, I just crack up at these kids because they can talk a blue streak, but you don't understand a blessed word they're saying. There is no effort associated with this. Kiddos with CAS, prosody is impaired. It is intact with phono. CAS, on-demand speech is going to be most difficult. So the child may be able to say his first and last name really well when it's on his terms, but it's circle time or when they meet somebody new and somebody says, oh, what's your name? Now they're being put on the spot, and so then the child can't get it out. Or the child may be able to sing Twinkle Twinkle at preschool during circle time because that's where they practiced it, but when they go to grandma's house and mom says, oh, sing Twinkle Twinkle for grandma, the child goes and can't get it out. So what we know is success, verbal success is situationally dependent. With a phonological disorder, verbal success has nothing to do with the situation at all. They talk the same whether they're on the playground, whether they're in circle time, whether they're at the dinner table. CAS therapy is going to focus on movement patterns, whereas with a phonological disorder, therapy focuses on sound patterns. All right, differentiating CAS from a speech and language delay. This is a really important one, especially if you work in early intervention, okay? So while we hear this term late talkers all the time, right? Oh, he's a late talker. And if you follow me on social media, you know that one of my big soapboxes is this idea of let's just wait and see. So parent takes their child to their 18-month checkup or 24-month checkup with the pediatrician and says, I'm really worried little Joey isn't talking, and I'm very concerned about that. And the pediatrician says, oh, let's just wait and see. Let's give him 6 months and see how he's doing. I am not a proponent of the wait and see approach, okay? My new favorite hashtag, in fact, is hashtag let's just see. I'd much rather, if the parent reports a concern, the parent is the expert on the child. Any parent who reports a concern, there should be a referral to a specialist. I'd much rather a speech language pathologist determine whether there is cause for concern or not, instead of having a generalist, a pediatrician, determine whether to be concerned or not. So when you have late talkers, we are really trying to figure out, is this child presenting with a delay or with a disorder? So a child who has a delay is going to acquire their prelinguistic milestones in a very typical manner, meaning they're meeting their milestones in the correct sequence or order. They're just behind schedule. But a child with a disorder is going to have what we call scattered skills, right? So you start looking at your diagnostics, and you start recognizing, oh my gosh, this child doesn't have any solid skills at any one level. So he never babbled, he never cooed, he never orally explored as a baby, but he can say mommy. And you're like, that I just don't understand how that's possible, how you can skip all of those milestones. Well, those are what we mean by scattered skills. So kiddos with CAS, they're going to make very slow, inconsistent progress in therapy. Kiddos who are late talkers, kiddos with just a language delay, they make us look good because these kiddos make much more rapid, consistent progress in therapy. I love working with a kiddo who has a delay because you know what? I get to do this. Right? It's amazing. They make me look good, right? And I feel very confident when I work with a child with a speech or language delay. With proper stimulation, those kids rock and roll. You've got to understand that when a child has CAS, it doesn't matter how much you read to the child, how much you sing to the child, how much you talk to the child, okay? Increasing ambient language exposure is not enough because this is a motor-based speech sound disorder, okay? So this isn't because of lack of stimulation or anything like that. So we have to acknowledge the difference there. Kiddos with CAS have a limited babbling history. Kiddos with a speech and language delay have a much more typical babbling history. A lot of parents say, well, yeah, he babbles, listen to him, but he's almost 2. Shouldn't he be saying real words pretty soon? So they tend to get stuck in the babbling phase. Kiddos with CAS have a disruption in the normal sequence of speech development, right? They sometimes acquire later developing speech sounds, but they don't have bilabials. You're like, how in the world does this kid have an SH and an R and he can't even make PB and M? And you're like, I just don't get it. See, that is not typical acquisition of sounds. Kiddos with a speech or language delay, they have a mild lag in development. They simply speak like a child who is chronologically younger. When I do an evaluation on a kiddo with a delay, I leave that evaluation and go to my car and I think to myself, cute kid. I just would have never guessed he was 2. I would have pegged him at 18, maybe 20 months old, and he would have been very typical. But the fact that he's 25 months old, I'm a little bit concerned. But you see, they simply act and speak like a child who's younger. When I leave an evaluation and the child has a disorder, I leave there with a pit in my stomach. And all I can think is, oh my gosh, we got to get this kid like some therapy, like immediately. Kiddos with CAS, speech therapy is going to be based on the principles of motor learning. There is no other type of therapy that is going to help. You can't do articulation therapy for a kid who has CAS. You can't do phonological therapy with a kid who has CAS. You have to use principles of motor learning. When you have a kiddo with a speech and language delay, here's what's crazy, okay? Increasing ambient language exposure, meaning increasing how much you talk to the child, how much you sing to the child, how much you read to the child, how much you play with the child, how much how much cognitive stimulation do you give that child? Guess what? It will support speech and language development. CAS, those kiddos have a limited number of speech sounds in their repertoire. A lot of times they have a go-to or a default sound. In early intervention, I hear a lot of just da, da, or sometimes it's just ah. With a speech and language delay, those kiddos have a much wider variety of speech sound in their repertoire because remember, they're babbling, they're making sounds. Kiddos with CAS tend to overuse those neutral vowels, ah. Kiddos with a speech and language delay, here's what's tricky, you guys, especially in early intervention. These kids rely heavily on the grunt. Oh my gosh, he overuses the neutral vowel. No. If he is grunting, okay, he is grunting because he's either trying to get your attention or because he wants something. And as soon as he gets that thing, he stops grunting, right? He's using it in lieu of a word. Kiddos with CAS are using for every word approximation. It's the only thing that comes out. Kiddos with CAS have limited or absent verbal imitation skills. So these kiddos are not communication risk takers. And I'm telling you this, kids with apraxia have an awareness. They know that they can't talk. And so they're not willing to take a risk because they know they can't say it, so they won't even attempt it. So one of the courses I have available on my website is called Creating Communication Risk Takers in Young Children with Apraxia. You have got to help them understand that, buddy, all I need you to do is open your mouth and turn your motor on, and whatever comes out is good enough. Because what I'm going to do, what my skilled service is going to be, is I'm going to help you shape those vocalizations into words and word approximations. But the only thing you can't make another human being do is talk. Okay, you can't make them vibrate their vocal folds. So I need him to take that much of a risk. I need you to open your mouth and turn your motor on. And in my courses, my full courses, I have, and in our book, tons of strategies to help you guys, help these children become communication risk takers. Kiddos with speech and language delay, their verbal imitation skills improve drastically when we address them in therapy. I mean, it's amazing the progress most of those kiddos make. Kids with CAS, prosody is impaired. Again, it's intact with that. Kiddos with CAS are not consistently adding words to their expressive vocabulary. So they have a history of pop-out words, which means they may say a word one time and then they don't repeat it. And this is why parents think the child is stubborn. This is why parents say he won't. He said mama for a whole weekend and now he won't say it again. But is it won't or is it can't? And that requires a pediatric SLP with an understanding of motor speech disorders to be able to determine won't versus can't. Kiddos with a speech and language delay, they tend to add words to their expressive vocabulary when they are exposed to a language-rich environment. So this is, I think, some of the most important research that has come out on apraxia, just came out last year, and you really should make sure that you have this information readily available. Suspected childhood apraxia of speech is a thing. It is something that we should be talking about with our very young children, and these are tentative guidelines for identifying CAS at age 2. Are you kidding me? We finally have it. And it has to do with how many consonants are in the child's repertoire. So there's the information. If you have your phone, take a snapshot of this slide. I will be making this into, I'll transfer this into a handout so that you guys can have it. Just give me, some time to do that. I'll do it tonight and get it to Speakeasy so that they can put it up on their website or however they're going to just give that out. But you definitely need to be aware that we need to know that needs to be part of your case history is how many consonants does your child produce, and you want to know if they're consistently produced or not. So I just want to share a few therapy solutions when we're talking about apraxia, and of course getting parents involved is going to be key. The only way to master a motor skill is through repetition. There is absolutely no other way to master a motor skill. And so we as providers must understand the difference between motor performance and motor learning. So motor performance are what we, if you're a data collector, like in a therapy session, your pluses and minuses, you're measuring how the child performed with your skilled services, with all your prompting and your cueing. But motor learning is actually referring to the generalization of skills outside of therapy. So like when I attend, my son has autism, apraxia, and sensory processing disorder. When I would attend one of my son's IEP meetings and a therapist would say, oh, Aaron met goal number 4 on the IEP, I would say, that's great. Where did he meet it? And the therapist would often look at me and go, well, I mean, I'm a therapist. I work with him in my therapy room. Okay, so that, where his goal was met in the therapy room. So that is evidence of his motor performance. But where has that skill been documented that he's using it in the natural environment? And in a school, what's the natural environment? Well, everywhere but your therapy room is natural environment. So I want to know where you've documented that he's using that skill in the classroom, in the library, in the classroom, or on the playground, in the gymnasium. But I really want to understand that there's some motor learning going on too. Motor performance is not enough. We have to make sure that we are getting generalization and carryover. And that's why I am such a huge proponent of coaching, of working in tandem with the parents, with the caregivers, with the preschool teachers, with the classroom teachers, with grandparents, because it's not enough to just get motor performance. All right, we have to get that generalization and carryover. So let's talk about the difference between the words therapy and intervention. Okay, if we're going to get follow through by families, caregivers, teachers, everybody else, we have to make sure they also understand what their role is in the therapeutic process. Okay, so therapy is time spent in direct contact with the child, and therapy can only be provided by a therapist. We are not under any circumstance ever asking parents to do therapy with their child. It doesn't work. It's not a natural interaction between a parent and a child. Okay, that's my job, is to provide the therapy. Intervention is what occurs the rest of the time between therapy sessions. So who provides the intervention? Well, everybody but me. I don't provide intervention. I provide therapy. So are there kids on our caseload who get therapy and no intervention? Of course there are. Unfortunately, it's the majority of our caseload. My primary goal is to, especially if a child isn't making good progress, if a parent is frustrated about the lack of progress or the teacher is frustrated, the goal is not to increase therapy, which is what everybody wants to do. Oh, Miss Cari, maybe you need to come twice a week. You know what? It's not about what I do. It's about what happens when I'm not here. That's what I want to increase, is I want to make sure these strategies are being embedded into daily routines and interactions, even when I'm not here. So what we do is, our response is not to increase therapy. Our response is to up the intervention. Right? So one thing I say to empower parents is this early intervention program is going to provide an hour of therapy, to your child. But the awesome thing about this program is you get to determine how much intervention your child receives each week. That's called parent empowerment, and it's huge. And what we need to do is put the onus of responsibility where it belongs, which is on the parent's shoulder. The parent is the first and most important teacher a child will ever have. My job is to empower parents. How do I do that? By transferring my skills and knowledge to the parent. That is really what coaching is all about. And if you work in a school, it's about transferring your skills and knowledge to the classroom teacher, who is the primary caregiver in the educational setting. So this is based on Robin McWilliams' support-based services model. So you can see that down here you have the therapist, and that I certainly work directly with the child. I add 3 terms to Robin's model. This represents the therapy. This line over here represents coaching, and this line here represents the intervention. So this is something that I draw with a Sharpie marker on a piece of paper for every family that I work with. And the reason I use a Sharpie is for this line here between therapist and child, I want that to be a very narrow line, indicating this is not the most important thing. The most important thing is that you and I are collaborating together so that you can provide intervention to your child when I'm not here. When we look at prognostic indicators for a child with CAS, we are looking at the severity, the child's cognitive skills, the child's personality and temperament. Do you know what I mean by that? You know how some kids, they are risk takers, and you walk in the room and they are all about it, right? They can't wait to get started. Whatever you want them to do, they'll attempt it. Well, then there are those kids who are a little more uncertain. They kind of hide behind mom for a while. Every visit, you've been coming for 6 months, and they still are a little hesitant. Every week you're building rapport and trying to build their trust every week. Those kids are going to make slower progress because we're spending so much time just trying to get going every session. Age at which therapy was initiated, the earlier the better. Coexisting conditions. The 3 that I have with an asterisk next to them, these are the only 3 we can control, you guys. So let's make sure we're controlling them. Family involvement in home practice is critical for these kids to make progress. Motivation. Okay, what words are we working on? Because if we're using some flashcards that have words on it that are not relevant and meaningful to the child, guess what? There's going to be very poor motivation. So we want to pick the child's name, the child's dog's name, the child's 3 favorite foods. Our target words want to include things like his favorite show, his best friend at preschool, his teacher's name. What does the kid love? Those need to be our target words so that we are working on words that are powerful, relevant, and meaningful to the child. You have to make the risk worth the effort, because this is so challenging for these kids. Okay, so you can't just pick random words that you think are going to be important for the child to work on. They have to come from the parent and the family so that they're extremely motivating. And then the appropriateness and effectiveness of the therapy. So let's talk about this. Increasing ambient language exposure, okay, is not going to be enough to build the flexibility and reliability of the child's speech motor planning system. So when we as therapists focus primarily on play and language, what you're going to see is this receptive expressive language gap is just going to continue to widen. Because if we're not addressing the motor speech deficits, you understand, speech skills remain here. Oh, we're working on receptive language and play, and guess what? Receptive language just continues to grow. And what happens? Somebody earlier today cited the research that shows that kids who struggle learning to talk have more temper tantrums, right? They have more behaviors. Everybody is frustrated if you can't communicate verbally or communicate in some functional way. So we can do play-based therapy. Don't get me wrong. I'm a huge proponent of learning through play. But here's what we need to make sure. We need to make sure that during play, we are embedding strategies based on the principles of motor learning. Apraxia therapy should look and sound different from any other kind of therapy that we do. Okay, there should be very concrete strategies used to support these kiddos. So speech motor planning therapy is going to address movement patterns. So you don't work on you don't work on an E, you work on me, right? You work on the movement, okay? You have to determine what level are the child's speech motor planning skills disintegrating, right? When does it fall apart, right? Is it at the syllable level? Can they do 2 syllables? If so, then you work on 3 syllables, right? And I'm not just talking about like multisyllabic words. Because of co-articulation, if you say, happy bunny, that's a 4-syllable utterance. Okay, so bunny hop is a 3-syllable utterance. You don't have to work on weird words like celebration and transportation that no kid uses. You want to pick functional phrases. Because of co-articulation, they become a very complex utterance, and so you can address it in a functional way. So we're working on co-articulation. We know that AAC is often indicated until the child's speech motor planning system kicks in. Therapy for a phonological disorder involves establishing correct sound patterns, not movement patterns, but sound patterns. How do we do that? We eliminate incorrect sound patterns, right? Like final consonant deletion, velar fronting. And articulation therapy is designed to help the child learn to produce specific consonant sounds correctly. Joey will produce B in the initial position of words with 80% accuracy. That's an articulation goal. That is not a speech motor planning goal. So I'm going to throw a wrench in everything here and let you know that a lot of our kiddos have a mixed speech sound disorder. And guess what that means? That means we're going to have different treatment approaches and different treatment goals. So you may have one child who has a combination of motor speech goals, phonological goals, and articulation goals. And you should have treatment strategies that fit into those different types of therapy. So the principles of motor learning, this comes from that article by Dr. Moss, that tutorial that I referenced earlier. So I'm obviously not going to be able to go into this in great detail, but if you are an SLP, you must understand the principles of motor learning. So there are 4 factors, right? One is pre-practice. So you have to make sure the child is properly motivated, that the child understands the task, that the child has a reference of what is correct and what is incorrect, that the child is stimulable to avoid frustration. These are harder to do with kids under 3. I hope you understand that, a lot of these things, our therapy is going to be much different for our birth to 3 population, because they're not sitting at a table doing drill work like older kids can. We're going to look at structure of practice. We know you need a large number of trials, but we also have to understand variable practice. And what that means is you work on multiple targets at the same time. That has been shown to improve speech motor planning skills. It also means you practice targets in different contexts. So maybe you work on, sounds in functional words where that sound might occur in the initial position, but also in the final position. Stimulus selection just simply means high frequency speech targets. So you don't want to pick a word that never shows up in day-to-day conversation. You really want to be sensitive about your first targets and pick words that are relevant and meaningful. Now, this is what's going to rock your world. You don't pick targets based on developmental norms. You don't say, well, we're going to work on earliest developed speech sounds first, because that is not consistent with principles of motor learning. What you figure out is what phonemes are already in the child's repertoire. So if you have a child who has only sounded duh, I'm going to think to myself, all right, what other sounds are kind of in that area? So he's got duh. Well, I want to try the T sound. I want to try and the ol, right? Because if he can get his tongue tip elevated, we want to pick some target words where maybe it has a similar location, okay? So you're going to be really thinking about, maybe you have a little guy. One of my first Apraxia clients years ago taught me so much about this therapy. The only sound he made was wasn't even a K sound. It was like this total guttural sound. So I'm like, all right, he hasn't pulled everything forward through the vocal tract, doesn't even know he has lips, okay, and a tongue. He can use the back of his tongue. So guess what? We're going to start with K, G, and H, because that's where he's at. So his first word approximations were car, go, and hi. We got him within about, I think it was 2 to 3 visits. We got those because I was meeting him where he's at. Much different than following developmental norms for articulation therapy. And then the nature of feedback. There's 2 types of feedback. There's frequency. We don't want to give feedback every single time. And timing simply means you don't necessarily want to give them the feedback immediately after they make their production, because what you want to do is really start encouraging, especially in older kids, self-monitoring. So you want to give them a chance to self-correct before you give them feedback. There's 2 treatment approaches for CAS that have some evidence behind them. I'm just telling you, there's not a lot of research out on CAS yet. It's coming, and we're getting it in loads now. So this is good, but dynamic temporal and tactile cueing, DTTC, is Dr. Strand's method, and it has the most evidence behind it. This is where you sit face-to-face with the child, and it's look, listen, do what I do. There's a lot of in unison with these kiddos, so you say the sounds together in unison. unison, or not the sounds, the targets in unison. REST is out of Australia. It's another approach. I really believe in DTTC. But for kiddos who don't yet attempt verbal imitation, you're going to have to turn these kiddos into communication risk takers first, right? DTTC doesn't work unless a child can attempt verbal imitation. And my real area of expertise is working with those pre-verbal kids who, and minimally verbal kids, where it is like pulling teeth to get them to imitate a sound, you know, to try to get that. So that's really what a lot of my courses are all about. So real quickly, we only have a couple minutes. When we're talking about therapy, just remember it's about repetition, right? We really have to focus on eliciting multiple repetitions, but without doing drill work. So I think the main question to ask, you know, Kyla asked us, what's your superpower? And this wasn't on there, but I always say this, our superpower as SLPs is figuring out how to make something that is intrinsically not fun, fun. Because let's be honest, repetitive speech practice is about the most boring thing on the planet, okay? So what do we do to make something not fun, fun? So using multisensory cueing is really gonna be key, but just remember, we're working on movement between sound, syllables, and words. So I'm just gonna share with you, I have 2 slides just to give you an idea of therapy. You wanna look for games and activities that have multiple identical pieces. Why? Because the number of pieces equals the number of potential repetitions. So this mighty monkey pegs, you get like 30, 35 monkeys, and you're supposed to stack them. So with minimally verbal kids, you can just do up, but you're going to do it 35 times, however many monkeys there are. I have an actual key in the box, because what a lot of my kiddos who are at the word level do is they call it a mai. No, it's not a mai, it's a ma key. Ma key. Ma. And all I have to do is posture, which is a visual cue, and then show them the key, which is another visual cue. And a lot of those kids can get the second syllable out. So connect 4, pick your target word. Maybe it's, you know, bunny, because Easter is coming up. And the child, you know, just says ba, right? But he can say ba, and he can say ni, but he cannot sequence those together. So we might use connect 4, where you just drop. I have the red checkers, he has the black checkers, and we take turns dropping those checkers in to get 42 repetitions. Pop-up pirate, using a die, an abacus is another great way to get tons and tons of repetitions, but in a more playful way. As far as visual cues, you must sit face-to-face with these children, and this is why teletherapy will work, okay? Because the key is, you know, instead of just look at me or watch me, I did a social media post on this recently, look at me for help. You need to tell them why you want the kid to look at you, right? Because you need to see what I'm doing with my lips, tongue, and jaw. Look at me for help. And a screen like this, doing teletherapy, it is set up for visual cueing. My silly sounds cards, my animal vowels, I designed them so that they are held right next to the mouth. Again, I'm getting lots of feedback from people starting teletherapy who were thrown into this, who are saying these are working extremely well because of the positioning. The Bjorn speech sound cues are phenomenal. You can use signs, you know, apple. I always try to pair the sign and do it so that it matches how many syllables in the word. Hat, right? A bug. Candy. So whatever you're doing, I try to use those and make them more salient so that I can draw attention to the motor speech aspect. Graphic cues, pairing a letter, like a refrigerator magnet letter with it, right? Sometimes all I have to do is show the child the letter B because I've paired it, and the child will say ball just by me showing him the B. So the last thing, I'm not going to read these to you, but I just gave you 3 slides filled with examples of how to write motor planning goals. They should not look like artic goals, and they should not look like phono goals. So again, I'm not going to read them to you, but you will notice that all of them are about movement, okay? And I think that most of us, I graduated from grad school in 1995, most of us had very little to no training on how to assess, diagnose, and treat children with apraxia of speech. So this is something we are all learning. It is a very important thing. I think it is that there are more kids who have motor planning struggles than we even recognize. The DEMS, the Edith Strand's new test, is the one you want to use. It is a motor speech skills test. I don't even know. I'm trying to think if I have it handy. I'm getting ready to move. We're moving on Thursday, so my entire office is packed up and life is crazy. But I will make sure to post that evaluation, because I know you're going to ask me what test we should use. And it is the dynamic evaluation of motor speech skills, DEMSS, DEMS. Dynamic Evaluation of Motor Speech Skills by Dr. Strand is the new gold standard for diagnosing CAS. So thank you for joining me today. I know that was just a whirlwind of information. I'm used to speaking for 6 hours at a time, so 45 minutes is like, brrr. So anyways, I hope you're able to stay up. I will make sure to get this turned into a handout for you. And just know that because of COVID-19, I have a sale going on all my self-study videos, so that while you're sitting at home, hopefully you can get some meaningful seat views out of the way. So, all right. Sorry, Kyla, I just went 100 miles an hour though, but.
It was great. Thank you so much for sharing all of that and for condensing it into the short time that we gave you. We really appreciate it.
You bet.
So we do have a few questions, actually several questions that people have been writing in. If you can stick around and answer a few of those.
Sure.
Christina says, in your experience, have you seen that it's common for kids with autism to end up with a diagnosis of apraxia?
Okay, so can you see me first of all? I don't know what I'm doing on
I'm gonna turn your screen off right now.
There we go. Thank you. So yeah, in my full version, I have differentially diagnosing autism and apraxia, because I'm telling you, a lot of our littles are coming to us with a diagnosis of autism. And as I'm working with this child, I'm like, well, the one thing in the world I know this kid doesn't have is autism. I'm seeing that kids are getting misdiagnosed as having autism when what they actually have is apraxia paired with a sensory processing disorder. So what we really have to be looking at is joint attention. And we, Andy did a great job, really talking about those indicators there. Can children with autism have apraxia? Of course they can. Anything can be comorbid. So those kids, we're going to have to really tease out what is motor planning struggles versus what is, I have no idea what words are for. I thought words were just for labeling. I can label letters, numbers, shapes, and colors till the cows come home. And my mama thinks I'm so smart because I know all those things. And so we're trying to then figure out, but wait, it's how he says them. So we have to start looking at the motor speech aspect of it. So can they have it? Can they have both? Of course they can. With autism, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm less concerned about motor speech early on, and I am more concerned about social reciprocity, about functional communication, about moving past just labeling. The one thing I explain to all my families is labeling is not a functional communication skill. It's not functional, right? It's great to figure out what their labeling vocabulary is. So just real quickly, and then we'll move on. SLPs, you should be tracking 2 different expressive vocabularies. You should have, what is their labeling expressive vocabulary? And then what is their functional vocabulary? Meaning, what do they use to communicate wants, needs, and feelings? Because that is different from their labeling vocabulary.
Great. Nicole says, a question regarding the tentative guidelines for identifying CAS at age 2. Are you looking for a child to have all of these? If not, how many for you to confidently determine CAS at that age?
It's all of them. I mean, those are the guidelines. So they're chronological. If you kind of look at them, those are the guidelines. So you need to be able to ask the parent, these specific questions. The main thing too, when you're doing evaluations, you guys, we live in the digital age. When I call to schedule an eval, I say to the parent, please find videos from when your child was 3 months old, 6 months old, 9 months old, 12 months old, 15 months old. The birth to 15-month age range is what I'm looking for as a clinician to differentiate between a delay and a disorder. Okay, so parents don't know the difference between cooing and babbling and reduplicated jargon. They don't know the difference between all that. We do. So I actually want to see videos. And when I write my report and it's information I've received from a video, I will actually say information was obtained via parent report, skilled observation, and retrospective video analysis. It is a new thing, and we should be documenting it. You should be watching videos that parents provide of the child's development. It's huge, and it changes everything, because honestly, parents aren't very good reporters, and it's not their fault. We all forget, right? We all have difficulty putting development into words.
Rachel says, do you find that some kids need to have a certain number of words before you're sure it's apraxia?
Nope. Absolutely not. I'm looking at movement patterns. I have again, if you take the full course, I have all the characteristics of very young children with suspected CAS. And and I show videos in there of kids. It's easier when you can kind of explain it and show it. But no, there's nothing about how many words. We're looking at speech, the flexibility and reliability of the child's speech motor planning system. So yeah, it's really not about number.
And a comment from Jenna and Ashley from Building Abilities said, DEMS, yes, but it's a struggle with the scoring. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
Well, all I will say is because I work birth to 3, I don't use it for anything standardized, but what it does is it helps you figure out the dynamic cueing, what kind of cues you should be using. Dave Hammer and I, in our book, we have a whole chapter on multisensory cueing. I mean, it's very important, and some of the most important cues are those kinesthetic cues, you know, like the body awareness, proprioceptive cues, and helping them figure out where, you know, a lot of my kids don't even know they have lips and a tongue. I mean, it's just amazing to me. You know, when you say pop your lips, they have no idea. They have such poor body awareness. They don't even know where their lips are. So like one of my silly sounds in my set A is really to help the child find their lips. And this is the fish. And I'm telling you, kids with Apraxia can't do it. I mean, sometimes it may take 6 weeks. The other one I do is the dog. And that is simply to establish awareness of, I can't use awareness cues if, you know, if the child has no idea where they are. Oh my goodness, I have some update that wants to happen. Please happen in 4 hours. Thank you. Oh my gosh, sorry.
Well,
okay.
We'll grab one more question and
okay, perfect.
and kind of related to what you're talking about a little bit. Janet says, in your experience, have you found that gross motor movement prior or during therapy helps with CAS kids?
I am all about movement. Absolutely. I don't really sit. And this is why I think we're going to have a problem with teletherapy, because, you know, the anticipation by the parent is the kid's going to sit here and stare at that SLP's face. I'm telling you right now, movement supports speech development. I mean, the more you understand sensory, because I'm telling you right now, sensory trumps everything. The more you can incorporate vestibular, proprioceptive, and tactile, the power senses, the more you can incorporate that type of input, the more the speech is going to develop. I am a huge believer in swinging in speech therapy. Rhythmical movement regulates, okay, the nervous system. So yeah, I don't believe in strapping kids into high chairs or chairs and making them, you know, focus. I am all about movement activity. So the teletherapy session I did the other day with a very active 3-year-old, I mean, very active. With the sister, I invite the sister. I always think siblings should participate. And we were doing songs and finger plays, just trying to get head, shoulders, you know, but they were running around and jumping. And then mom would corral him and bring him back. We'd focus on my face a little bit, pull out some target sounds, and then he'd move. And you have to be okay with that, because I don't expect in an in-person session for a toddler or, you know, a young preschooler to sit perfectly still. So yeah, it's our biggest challenge, because a lot of therapists are used to having a little table and chair where a child sits perfectly still. But just remember, movement activates the ability to speak, and it's because the vestibular sense is housed in the inner ear, which is where the auditory sense is housed. And when you stimulate one, it is anatomically connected. It will thereby stimulate the other. So movement activates the ability to speak. This is a movement disorder. Movement is our friend. Not chaotic, crazy, out of control movement, though. Okay? It's so important. That's why you better have a best friend who's an OT. And if you don't have one, find one today. Okay.
Yes, Cari, I love that.
Yes,
I love that. You are spot on with all of that. I love that.
Yeah, the sensory piece is huge, and sensory for the SLP is something that that's one of my courses, is really focusing on how critical it is that we understand how to regulate a nervous system, you know, and that's why we do it in conjunction with the OT. I am not an OT. I don't claim to be an OT, but I'm telling you, I have a kid with autism, right? And I work with kids who struggle with regulation. And until you address and get them in a ready state for learning, you're just spinning your wheels as an SLP. You literally waste everybody's time and money. So get them regulated, and then we can work on talking.
Thank you.
I love that.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of our presenters for making this a really awesome afternoon and letting us share some information with you and just be here and connect. It's been really fun for me, and I hope it's been really fun for all of you too. Can we give a little sign language applause to all of our presenters? Thank you. If you still have any energy left at all and you want to stick around and say hi, I'm going to be here. The chat's going to be open for a little bit, but feel free to say your goodbyes too at this point. Thank you so